Just to kind of fulfill my background, over 60 years in growing stuff, and I was about 7 years old, or actually younger than that, probably four, weeding carrots with my grandmother. She was a phenomenal gardener, all self-taught, and she's what gave me my desire to be into gardening and eventually fruit growing. Been in Bainbridge since '99. I love micro farming in the sense of trying to do intensive gardening in very limited space. And my wife and my mother-in-law always used to say, well, you should buy more land. And I only have a third of an acre. And it's kind of like, well, as you get older, you appreciate the smaller space. That's all I can tell you. And I'm also a longtime member of the Western Cascade Fruit Society, which basically was established to help fruit growers in Western Washington because of the unique climate, the moisture, the rain, and all that stuff. And then in 2014, I established the Bainbridge Island Fruit Club, which is one of their 8 chapters. So here's my property. Just give you an idea. It's just up from the ferry parking lot. It's surrounded by trees to some extent, but they aren't tall trees, which is nice. And I bought this property in part because it was basically a blank slate. So other than the two trees in the front, all around the back and on the sides had nothing. It was just basically grass. So I saw this as a great palette upon which to really experiment and do things over the last 20 plus years. So, what are the biggest things that we make mistakes on when we try to grow things? And I think part of it is poor soil preparation. And I see this constantly in the pea patches I'm involved in, the different community gardenings and stuff like that. In that soil preparation is so critical for both your containers as well as your soil that you're growing out in the yard. Planting seedlings, and plants too close is always another problem. I always find it humorous to go to some of the pea patches because that's a great experimental area where I'll notice people buy a package of, let's say, 4 or 5 squash plants, and they're all densely packed, and they'll put them in that same one hole, all 5 or 6 of them, instead of separating them. Poor mixing of varying size plants. Do you plant a corn next to, let's say, a cucumber? Depending on the lighting and stuff, that may not be a great idea. And then poor plant care, watering, fertilizing, staking, pruning, all are so critical to getting your maximum production. And then also inadequate light, airflow between plants. If you're too dense, you can have moisture, you can have fungal and other issues that come up.
And it's still in tune.
And, and then someone's talking. And then finally, inadequate pest control. I'm going to have some slides talking about different things you can do, low-cost methods by which to kind of control those pests that are so annoying both to your fruit as well as to your vegetables. Making the best use of what you have. This is a photo of my yard. My yard was basically established where they pulled from the side of the hill a level spot, and what they left was hard pan. So when I started developing my beds, most of them were raised beds or where I brought in a lot of like emu topsoil and other things to try to build up the soil in order to basically produce the fruit that was or the food that was needed. Um, the last speaker you had last month talked about the double digging method, or not digging method, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that because there's I think a way in which double digging is an important facet into your gardening. Shade, many of us have shade as an issue because we live on Bainbridge. Those beautiful Douglas fir and cedars can cause problems. But there are also some vegetables and fruit that do well in shade, or at least you get production out of them. Maybe not as much, but you still get good production. And then pest controls, what are some methods that you can use that are efficient, but at the same time you can use year after year without having to spend a lot of money on buying the same either material, pesticides and stuff, which most of us, at least I do, want to try to avoid. Okay, double digging. I believe it was Grace at the last presentation last month was talking about the no dig method, which is something that a lot of people are advocating because by digging, you basically disturb a lot of the microbes and stuff that are in the soil that build up after a while and are actually very beneficial, and therefore the soil has to reconstitute itself to some extent. But also the double digging method, which is one that I kind of have advocated, at least initially. And the reason being is that a lot of the soil on Bainbridge, particularly my yard, had a lot of hard pan. And what the benefits of double digging is you dig down several feet, you break up that hard pan, you add compost into the trench, and then put your soil back on top. And so for initially, the breaking up that hard pan is very valuable for the nutrients, the minerals, other things that are down there that normally plants, vegetables, and trees would have difficulty getting into. And so I think maybe a combination of no digging plus double digging maybe initially, and then moving to a no digging process maybe later on might be helpful. The no digging for me at least is somewhat problematic because I don't know about you guys, but I find that the soil gets very compacted, and so at least some digging of the soil is needed in order to allow some aeration and stuff, but maybe mulch and other things can kind of compensate for that. Okay, what are some of the soil amendments you can add to your soil? Against most of this, or many of this, you guys may already be familiar with as avid vegetable gardeners. But lime is something that's very valuable, but lime without magnesium. The magnesium tends to bind the soil, and especially with clay, it makes it very hard. Fertilizers, dry and liquid. I'm a proponent of some of the dry fertilizer in the spring, and then using liquid fertilizer during the summer as an amendment, particularly for your containers. Kelp, I was doing some research yesterday, and it's interesting that kelp is advocated because it has over 60 trace elements that are so valuable for plants' health and overall nutrition of the food that you then eat. Bone meal, alfalfa, compost tea, biochar, all these things can be beneficial. And again, I want to talk a little bit about biochar, but before I go there, let me see. Let's on the next slide talks about some of the optimum fertilizer mix. And this is one of the books that if you haven't had a chance to, I highly recommend. And it's by Steve Solomon. He was the founder of Territorial. And he was a big advocate of really understanding the soil that you have in your area. And one of the things he pointed out was for Cascadia, we're rich in nitrogen and phosphorus, but not much in the area, or excuse me, we're not as rich in nitrogen and phosphorus as we are with potassium. So when you're looking at your fertilizer, you might want to put more emphasis on the first two and less on the latter one. Okay, soil fertilizers. These are some common ones that that I've used to some extent in the past. Notice the different mix of them. So if we're trying to reduce the use of I think it was the potassium, or is it phosphorus? I'm trying to remember here. Potassium. You might be more apt to pick, like for instance, bone meal as an additive to some of the others as a way to try to compensate or make a more balanced fertilizer mix. Um,
Because potassium's the last number, right?
right. So like bone meal has zero potassium, but if you were to mix that with Dr. Earth or maybe with alfalfa, which have, a equal balance pretty much of the first and the latter one, that might compensate and give you more in the middle area, which is what you'd be missing from the other two to some extent. Okay, biochar. As well as compost and mulch. Because I have chickens, one of the things I do is I basically take bales of straw into my chicken pen and the chickens do their magic with it. And of course, there's a lot of manure and stuff mixed into it. And then I take that straw, which is somewhat composted by the chickens, and move it around and put it around the base of my vegetables and my fruit. And it's a wonderful way of keeping moisture in the soil, as well as when I water the mulch, it then leaches into the soil and adds fertilizer. So it's a nice combination of mulch plus fertilizer throughout the year. Compost, this photo is probably as a good illustration of how not to compost. You probably, for those that have done composting, realize you need to aerate. You do a mix of dry and green matter in order to try to burn the fungi and other, not fungi, but other bacterial things that you want to try to avoid into your soil. So it's a very good, nice compost. Here, what I've done is I basically throw whatever clippings I have from my yard, usually the soft matter, not the hard matter, because the hard matter is harder to compost. But then over a day, or excuse me, let's say 6 to 12 months, the compost basically erodes through worm and other, composting, but not the heated method. I don't advocate this, but I'm a lazy man when it comes to composting, and my chickens end up jumping in there anyway and scratching everything up. So one way or another, I get good compost. Maybe not the way that maybe I should be doing it, but I'll leave it at that. Biochar is something that, again, was discussed, and it is somewhat debatable about whether biochar is beneficial. Initially, it was a huge advocacy for biochar because of some findings they had in the South American area, large plots of land in the Amazon that had dark, fertile soil, that the only thing they could explain was because it had been used by biochar to build up that soil over many, many millennia. Um, and I can understand why biochar might not be seen as valuable in the garden, but I recently met one of my fruit friends at one of the local shows, and she's a huge advocate of putting biochar in the base of containers. Um, and the value that she saw in her fruit trees that she grew in these containers was radically better than those that did not have the biochar. Um, the other thing you might do if you do go ahead and use biochar is to soak it in compost tea and then put it into your soil. And that way the microbes have already kind of colonized that biochar that then can continue expanding those valuable um, elements into the soil that normally wouldn't be there if it was just the biochar by itself. Okay, one of the things, again, I mentioned about the hard soil, or at least the soil had been stripped, the topsoil from my area. So I did a lot of raised beds. I'm a big advocate of using cottage stones because guess what? They can be moved around, they can be changed, they aren't cemented into the ground. So there's a lot of value in using those, although they can be heavy. But I love just the flexibility, like a big Lego set. I can set them up and then I can move them if I want to. Um, Shade gardens are something that I think a lot of us kind of face when we try to garden in this area. If it's not your trees, it's maybe your neighbor's trees. But some of the fruit and vegetables that I've found that do fairly well in shade are include artichokes, globe artichokes, as well as Jerusalem artichokes. Again, totally different, but both do fairly well in the semi-shade. Beets and chard do fairly well. Currants, black and red currants, do very well in the shade. Garlic and leeks do so-so in the shade, but you have to be wary of some of the fungal issues that get into the garlic or the leeks. Kale and broccoli do great in shade, as does lettuce and spinach, particularly in the summer months when you have a lot of heat, like in August. Having a shaded area for growing some of the more delicate vegetables is very beneficial. Peas, I've had again grown in shade area where if they were in the sun, they'd have been long since expired as far as production. Potatoes do so-so in shade. Raspberries, I have a shaded area that I get a very nice crop of raspberries later in the season, but still that's nice if you have two parts of your yard that's very sunny and one that's shady. Plant raspberries in both. That way you can extend your growing season. And then finally, rhubarb does really well in shade as well as in full sun. Okay, moving on now to pests. A few years ago, I had so many slugs in my yard. I would go out there and I'd pick them up and put them in and for a graphic illustration, I put them in a jar and put them on my table. Fortunately, my wife wasn't there at the time, but the slugs just kind of oozed out like some, sci-fi monster movie. But yeah, they were horrible that year. And everyone probably is aware of slug eggs, baby slugs under cottage stones, and they tend to come out and do a lot of damage. And then the mulch related damage. If you do mulch, sometimes the slugs love mulch because they can kind of hide under it and then come out when they like to. Um, so slugs are one of the biggest issues, particularly if you're growing like dahlias, for instance, as well as your delicate plants, your broccoli, your spinach, peas, all that can be very much damaged by slugs. Some other common insects for both fruit and vegetables, the currant fly, as well as the sawfly, both affect either the fruit or the leaves of currants. Um, the carrot rust fly is another problem. I don't know. I've struggled with carrots because of the rust fly. Aphids can be very damaging both to vegetables and fruit, particularly some of my European plums are extremely addicted or at least affected by aphids during the summer months. The spotted-winged Drosophila, it's too bad I'm not in a room with everyone so everyone can raise their hands when I ask this question, but is everyone familiar with the spotted-winged Drosophila? I, I see Carol's familiar with it.
All
Um,
10 fingers.
Yeah, it's a fruit fly that actually originated from China. It's related to our fruit fly, but the difference is that this particular fruit fly has a segregated ovipositor, which is able to basically lay its eggs into fruit that's green. And this can be fruit like raspberries, strawberries, and some soft fruits such as cherries, for instance. And then when the fruit is about ready to ripen, it's actually browning or going bad because the spotted wing is actually its larvae is already in the fruit and causing damage. So if you've ever had some raspberries growing in your yard and you pick them and they're like mush in your hands, it's because the spotted wing pretty much is inside there. Um, Other insects, the cabbage worm, of course, we all are probably familiar with that, and the tent caterpillar is something that damages primarily, well, it can damage also some of your cane fruit, but primarily your fruit trees and stuff. Some other fruit-related insects, your codling moth and your apple maggots are both very damaging to apples. The collie moth can also damage pears. And the difference is that the collie moth creates those big holes and there might be a big hole that emits from the apple or the pear, as well as the huge tunnels that are inside. And the apple maggot is basically tons of little tunnels that are inside the fruit, making it unedible. Of the two, Moth is better than apple maggot because the apple basically is destroyed. But with Moth, it still is quite damaging because you have an apple that's not very palatable, at least looking. What are some le less expensive pest controls? Army surplus tents are great for both vegetables and fruit. I use them on my currants. That keeps the sawfly as well as the currant fly away. I place them after the fruit has bloomed and the fruit is forming, and that keeps basically both those pests away. BT is great for any of your cabbage worms or your tent caterpillars, anything that's has basically caterpillar type larvae. BT does great for minimizing that damage. I don't know how many people have used beer for slugs, but that's very effective. It's just a matter of putting out your little containers every couple of days with new beer. I go to Safeway, buy the cheapest beer I can, a six pack, Budweiser or something along those lines. Um, it's funny, the slugs tend to like the lighter beer rather than the darker beer. I don't know if anyone's seen anything different, but usually the lighter beer is something they're more apt to go for. And then apple vinegar traps. This is a kind of interesting trap for those of you that grow fruit and are trying to get the spotted wing as well as codling moth. You basically take a soda or water bottle, poke some holes in the top of it, and then you put basically a half an inch of apple vinegar, preferably organic, and a drop of unscented dish soap. And that's to break the consistency of the apple vinegar and so that when the fruit fly lands in it, then it kind of sinks and gets trapped. And I found that it's very effective in capturing the spotted wing, and it also captures a lot of the apple vinegar, or excuse me, the codling moth. And I don't know if for those of you that grow fruit, if you ever had those codling moth traps, which are basically put them in your tree, and the codling moth flies in and gets stuck to some adhesive material based on the lure that they're attracted to. I've done that in the past, and what happens, and haven't had much success with it. Basically, I may catch one just by accident, it flies in. But with the apple vinegar, I've caught hundreds of these in those traps. And again, the cost is astronomically cheaper than buying those special codling moth traps. And then also some of the beneficial insects, ladybugs. If you've gone to like the Bay Hen feed in some of the nurseries, they have the ladybugs you can buy. But in using ladybugs, I highly recommend, as they recommend, and I made this mistake the first time I used ladybugs, put them out at night with some moisture on the leaves when you're putting them out. If you put them out during the day, they fly away. So they don't stick around even for a day to help tackle your aphid infestation. So follow the instructions and make sure you release them at night and not during a hot period when they would then quickly mobilize and then move. Some of the other beneficial insects are also ones that you can purchase and then release and have proven to be very beneficial based on some of the folks I've talked to. Some protection that you can put on your fruit and stone fruit as well. I don't know if how many are familiar with footies or surround, which is a clay type substance that you spray on your apples. The footies and the surround basically provide a texture that the apple maggots do not like, and so they tend to avoid those fruit that have this type of substance on them. The footies you basically put on around before the 1st of July, and the fruit is about quarter size to a nickel size. Any larger, usually by July, the apple maggots are all over the place. Codling moth actually comes out when the first bloom occurs and will have several cycles in which they will kind of gyrate through. The first cycle is the smallest and the latter ones are the biggest. So by the time you get the footies on, there might be some codling moth damage, but nothing like it would be if you don't put any footies on them, through the summer. Surround is something that you spray again same time before July, and then you may have to spray another one or two times as the apple gets bigger or the fruit gets bigger. And there's also the issue of if we have any summer rain, it tends to lessen the amount of surround, so you have to spray again. But both are fairly inexpensive. Surround is far less laborious than with the footies. But the footies, the gratifying part is that once you're done, you're done. If that makes sense. And a good footy, if it's high quality, will last several years. I've washed them and I have a whole box of those that I've used several years now. Tree netting is something that's been used by some folks. The Seattle Tree Fruit Society has done this on some of their larger trees. I think the co-housing on Bainbridge Island also puts footies on their trees, or not footies, netting on their trees. It's quite laborious in the sense of having it on the tree, but then once it's on the tree, it's nice. But it can cause some of the branches to kind of bend down and stuff can cause issues that way. But again, much like with the footies, once you're done, it's you're happy with that it's done. Um, Apple lures as well as plum lures. Cowling moth traps I mentioned earlier is something you can do. I've had not much success with them compared to apple vinegar trap. And the plum lures, it's interesting because I did a plum presentation. They're not common here in the States. It's more of a European lure that's developed by the English. But I'm sure Amazon sells it that if you want to order it, you could give it a try. But I'm curious whether, in fact, the apple vinegar traps work as effectively with the plum maggots as well as the codling moth. So, or excuse me, the plum mouths. I have a feeling that it actually works just as well because the damage I have in my plums is minimal as far as with the plum maggots. Okay, beyond just your insect and other problems, when you're talking about fruit, one of the big issues is brown rot, which is a fungal disease that gets into especially stone fruit. And you can see some of the photos here. It comes in when the flowers are first blooming. It comes through the flowers into the branch and it causes either the cankers or that whole branch to die back. And you can see in the lower left-hand photo where the branch died. And then later on, depending on if the canker has formed, causing that oozing releases more spores throughout the summer so that by the time the fruit is forming and ripening, you'll have another batch of the brown rot causing a lot of fruit damage. Now, one of the good things is that you can use is a spray, and you can use either sulfur or copper spray. The thing about these type of sprays is that you do it during pre-bud, when the buds are starting to form, and then post-bloom, and then several times throughout the year. Last year, I just did a pre-bud and basically got lazy and didn't spray anymore. And then around fall, when the fruit was ripening, I noticed that brown rot was starting to cause a lot of damage to my plums, for instance, and my peaches. So what I did is I went out there and sprayed again, and believe it or not, that spraying before the fruit ripens, before it ripens, can prevent further damage to the fruit. The other thing is if you find your plums have a section where the fruit is starting to have brown rot, remove those immediately and it'll prevent spreading to other fruit on that tree because it does spread very rapidly by wind or by just, water splashing. So you can use the spray throughout the summer season, and particularly as the fruit is ripening, that's when to use it again to prevent any further damage to your fruit. Peach leaf curl is something that makes it really hard to grow peaches in this area. There are some peach varieties that are resistant to peach leaf curl, but many of those are not the most flavorful peaches. One of the things that I've learned, and it was again discovered by the English, is that you can cover your peaches from November, December, January into February, and maybe early March with a plastic tarp. And that plastic tarp, by keeping the peach dry, essentially drier from the rain, prevents the fungus from getting into the buds of the peach. So when the leaves come out early in the spring, usually around March to April, they aren't affected by peach leaf curl. So you can see in the far bottom right-hand corner, this was a dwarf peach tree called El Dorado. I just had one of those clear umbrellas I set up for the last couple of years, and so far it's worked out great. Some bigger pests, I think everyone here is familiar with the deer, the squirrels. I don't have much solutions for the squirrels, so I'll just leave him in the corner there. But there are solutions for birds as well as to raccoons, which of these four, I have to say raccoons are the most challenging. Squirrels, I mean, you can't do anything with them. At least I don't, they're just. I feed them. I have several very fat squirrels in my neighborhood. Common critter controls. So here are three different devices that I have purchased over the years. The Scarecrow, the Bell Howl motion detector. I don't know if they still sell them, but I got it at Rite Aid. And then electronic fencing from Ace Hardware. The Scarecrow is one you still might be able to find. It costs quite a bit. I mean, it costs upwards of $80, and it basically emits via motion water. So you hook it up to your hose, to your outlet to your house. The Bell Howl issues a very high-pitched sound, again, motion detector that supposedly scares deer and other small animals away. An electric fence just does a small shock that prevents the animal from wanting to climb up or to whatever, transport or try to get it past the electric wire fencing. Of these three, the Scarecrow, I one time had a large Italian plum tree and the raccoons were getting up in that tree, and so I put one up there, and the raccoons still got up. So I ended up putting three different scarecrow devices around that plum tree, and it was 3 o'clock at night, and I was trying to sleep, and I heard the because it was squirting water into the plum tree, only to realize that what happened was that the raccoons had crawled up in the tree. They were eating the plums with great delight and basically watching the Italian plums as they ate them. So the scarecrow, even three of those suckers at the expense I spent, was not very effective. The motion detector or the Bell Howl is great for trying to get small kids away from the neighborhood, and maybe some deer. I don't know. It was something that worked maybe the first year, and then after that, it wasn't very effective. Electric fencing I found as being very beneficial, and you can also be very creative with it. In this case, it looks like I put a little fence around the base of my plum tree, and you can do that. But what I found, I have one plum tree that grows over my chicken pen, and there's no way I'm going to be able to cover the base. I'd have to wrap all over the chicken pen, you name it, tons and tons of wiring. But in the end, what you all have to do is just put a couple of wires up into the upper branches, just a few, and what happens is that when the raccoon or the squirrel climbs up the tree and touches any of that wire, they're basically then taught to stay away from that area. And so all you have to do is just cover a couple of branches, not the entire tree, to prevent a lot of animal damage to those that are like raccoons and squirrels. Another way to keep raccoons out
Hey,
of your fruit
Darren,
trees.
we can check the questions.
Sure, go ahead.
Joanne wants to know what you think of soil testing. Do you think it's needed, and where's a good place to get it done? Before Darren answers, I'm going to say that Kim Smith gave us places last month. I think it was last month. And Joanne, if you don't get that, you've got my email. If you don't have that, you can email me. In addition to what Darren says, that's our first question, Darren. What's your experience with soil testing?
I never tested my soil, and I think in part because, you know, my lot, even though it's small, is so diversified because of all the raised beds. And I certainly could test one area and say, okay, this soil is needing of XYZ, but that not be applicable to other sections of my yard.
Because you're saying you treat each area really differently.
Well, it's just, yeah, I mean, or as time has gone by, it's changed radically based on what soil I've amended that year.
Hmm.
And most of my yard is fruit trees now, so I have less and less space for vegetables, which is basically required me to then farm out to doing pea patches, as well as to my few vegetable beds and
Hmm.
container gardening.
But if a person does have a bunch of beds, even if you feel like they're slightly different, but not terribly different, Joanne, you could, am I right, Darren? They like to get, I think now it's a pound or two of soil for that you mail for your sample often. And you can take some soil from each bed, and then it gives you sort of an overall picture as long as they've been treated fairly similarly.
Yeah, yeah, I support soil testing. It's just that for varying reasons, I have not done it.
Hmm.
I even have
So
a kit for testing, but I refuse to.
yeah, and they're different from the lab tests. But
Yeah, yeah,
Joanne,
not as not as good.
if you didn't get it last time from the chat, then I have one lab, and then Kim gave us, I think, three. Um, I suppose if Kim's here, I can't see everybody, but if you're here, you could plop them in the message in the chat if you want. And let's see. Susan asks, does surround wash off in the rain? Which you sort of referred to having to reapply it, right?
Yeah, it can rush out. Two things happen as the fruit gets bigger because if you spray initially when they're about quarter size, and then you get to about half dollar size or larger, like for an apple, for instance, you really have to spray again because the
Yeah.
surround itself has kind of stretched.
Uh-huh.
Not so with footies because footies they basically stretch. That's the whole
Right.
concept.
Do you know this last year I used some less lower quality footies and I didn't double them over. There's a way to twist them
Mhm.
and double them over. And they stretched out so much that they were like there was a lot of space for things to get in, I think. So
And
that's
so,
another
yeah, some of your lower
connection.
quality footies actually you'll still have some apple maggot damage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Deb Rudnick says, ever try PVC around the base of trees? That's the only thing I've ever found effective against raccoons is a smooth surface. I know you have. Tell us about it, Darren.
Yeah, can you see the next slide? Less expensive pest controls.
There you
I
go.
use linoleum, which had some excess when we moved into our house, as well as what's called bamboo barrier. And bamboo barrier is basically black plastic that you can buy in sheets and then cut to whatever length you want. And it's about 3 feet to 4 feet wide, and you wrap around the trunks of your fruit trees or your grape arbors or whatever, and the raccoon simply can't climb up the area because it's too slippery. Any other questions or
No, I'd like to say that was a lifesaver for me.
the bamboo barrier?
Yes.
Okay, cool. This is a photo I took at Vashon Island. It has a demonstration garden, and they had some raised beds of strawberries. And here they put netting over it with PVC pipe as a way of keeping the birds from eating the strawberries. But just a cool picture. Okay, when you run out of space, go up, out, or in between. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the different options for going up as well as out, and then also in between as far as intensive container gardening. How are we doing for time? Okay, 19 minutes. Shoot. Okay, grape arbors. These are simple little grape arbors that I assembled 4 by 4 by, like 10 or 8 feet, and then some cross beams. And again, you can see how rapidly they grew after just a couple of years. And here's one. It's kind of interesting. This is a grape I had in the back of my garage in the side of my house. Very dark area. I couldn't understand why the grapes, even though it only got a couple hours of direct sunlight, ripen faster than any other grapes. And what I found out later is that below the base of this grape arbor is the dryer vent. And so it was emitting all this heat from my dryer that would then cause the fruit to ripen and actually did quite well for the grapes. So again, some areas that you don't think are very productive could be very productive depending on where they're located and different circumstances. Colander apples are something that I grow a series of them just as kind of they're cool, they're very compact, and they grow straight up. They don't tend to bend out or grow out. So it's a nice area if you have a very selected space for growing some fruit trees and you don't want a big giant apple tree, you can just put a couple of these side by side and create a little hedge.
I have a question about this.
Yeah.
Is Scarlet Sentinel a good flavored one? Is that generally one that you'd recommend? Because sometimes they say, they bred for shape rather than flavor.
Yeah, it's actually quite nice.
Good.
And it's
Good to
very
know.
productive too. It's very productive, nice fresh eating. When you're trying to cook with it, it's kind of it doesn't mesh down like yellow transparent or Gravenstein, so it kind
Good.
of keeps its texture to some extent. But yeah, very
Great.
good.
Thanks.
Um, you can also multi-graft a tree, and so one of the things I've done is this is a stone fruit, but in this stone fruit you can see I have cherries, I have a number of different varieties of plums, and also an apricot all on one tree. And the advantages of doing a multi-grafted tree, because you can have multiple plums on a tree or multiple apples, multiple pears. In this case, I decided to kind of go, Frankensteinish and add, cherries and apricots to those plums. But it allows you a much longer growing season. So if you have a limited yard and you just have room for one tree, you can put a lot on that one tree if you want. And one of my plum trees has, I think, 4 or 5 varieties on it, some Japanese, some European. And actually, I get fruit off of that tree over like 3 month period and the first time in July clear through September. So again, just it prolongs your growing season. There's also things you can grow if you have I have a nice side lawn, which I'm reluctant to, tear up, but you can grow things on the side of your raised beds and let them kind of grow into the lawn, without damaging the lawn because by the time summer comes along, basically the grass is dead anyway, or at least it's gone to hibernation. So here I'm growing like banana squashes on my lawn. I also grow strawberries in container gardening, and which, here you see a container here, but here's more of the tabletop method I use for growing strawberries. These are and I'm sorry that Rite Aid, now CVS, doesn't sell these anymore, but these are wonderful little units that you can put throughout your yard. They're only about 3 to 4 inches deep, but guess what? Everbearing strawberries do fine in shallow soil. And the thing about this is you just have to make sure you amend it throughout. Start with excellent potting soil, and then later on amend it with some liquid fertilizer throughout the summer. But the nice things about these containers is they go on your lawn, you can move them around, and then it doesn't kill the lawn other than maybe a few holes, but it allows you to use your lawn without actually giving up your lawn. It also raises them above a lot of your insects and pests that normally would get into your strawberries and make them, less than palatable or steal them from you. These two varieties, which is the Albion and the or the Hecker strawberry, they trellis beautifully. So by the time of late summer, you have more fruit dangling off the sides than you have on the top of the tabletop. So again, it's a great way of growing this particular variety, these two varieties, and getting large crops throughout the summer. Join a local pea patch. These are two pea patches that I belong to, Johnson Farm as well as Wacky Nut. And you can see intensive gardening, intensive produce squeezed in there as much as I can to try to maximize my production. The right-hand version, I don't know if you can see my little arrow where it shows those bushes there. Those are black containers full of sweet potatoes. And so sweet potatoes do grow in this climate, but I highly recommend a container, black container that can kind of radiate the heat into the soil and therefore increase your chance of getting good sweet potatoes later in the summer. Driveway, I think we mentioned a little bit about that I use. I think Carrie mentioned in my introduction that I use my driveway because it has some of the best heat. And I'll show some photos of that. But here's some containers that are very good. I love the containers that have a water catchment area. My favorite are the green one in the middle at the bottom, as well as the far top right-hand corner. And I like the catchment area primarily because as you're watering your plant and the fertilizer you want to keep in the soil can be leached out. And so the first year I was growing my these large they look like ceramic, but they're not. They're plastic pots. I didn't have a water catchment, so a lot of the calcium was being washed down the soil and down into the street. The end result is that my tomatoes had a lot of blossom end rot. But by putting that container there, it keeps the calcium in the soil. If it is emitted into the bottom part through the watering that you're doing, it then sucked up back into the plant later on so you don't lose that.
And they have a special wicking system, so it's not like the bottom of the pot is sitting in the water, right? It
Right.
actually has a wick upward.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool. John
And
McInnes wants to know, oh, it's an apple maggot thing. Do you want to finish this and then
no,
we'll
go
get to that
ahead.
question? John McInnes asks, do you have better results with apple maggot resistance with late season varieties?
Actually, apple maggot does better with early season.
You mean they're more successful at evading apple maggot?
Yeah, so like your yellow transparents rarely have apple maggot damage because they ripen so early.
Hmm. You two
Well,
should probably know each other. John McInnes has hundreds of apples that are grafted.
okay.
Anyway, we'll
Yeah,
talk later.
I've also had good luck with resistance on the late season ones.
Yeah. The other thing that I found, like pink pearl is a pink flesh variety of apple that apple maggots love. So
Mm.
if you have a pink pearl tree, that can be used as an attractant tree or a lure tree. So the apple maggots will all go to that tree, infest it, and damage the fruit, but leave other fruit alone. So this one tree had like, let's say, a Spartan as well as pink pearl in it. Pink pearl were horrible. The Spartans were clean.
Hmm.
So
John,
there's other ways you
what
can work around it.
John, what's a super late apple that you found was successful at evading? Because
Well,
we know
well,
some from John, the early ones, but what's yours?
yeah, and one that I use all the time for applesauce and that type of thing is I don't know because it's been in the family
Oh.
since the 1800s. It's an
Mm.
old. I think I've heard it referred to as a Puget Sound Baldwin. And but lately I've been buying Graft Scion for late season, just to try to go with that because the middle season it makes sense if you not having it on yellow transparent. I don't currently have any yellow transparent,
Yeah.
But if that's effective on early season, it makes sense that it'll be effective on late season because the apples would be hard and probably not as easily damaged by the maggot, I'm guessing.
Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, it also depends on what your neighbors have as far as fruit. If they're good at cleaning up the fruit, you may not have a lot of apple maggots in your neighborhood.
Well, deer are good for that, so yeah.
Yeah, and chickens too. Chickens do a great job
Yep.
of eating the fruit, so it's not, the larvae aren't in the soil. Okay, sunny spot. Here's a photo of my garage. It's the sunniest spot. It has a lot of that, heat from both the side of the house as well as the concrete. I use those big, fake ceramic pots, as well as the lower containers. You can see spring and summer, how fast everything grows there. Um, then you also have fall, and here I've moved a lot of my peppers from my greenhouse or out in the back into the front area again to get some of that late summer, early fall heat for the hot peppers to ripen. And then during the winter, a lot of times those containers that have tomato plants, you can then put some, kale or other things that do well in the wintertime. And also beets, if you grew beets in these containers, like the bottom green container has some beets in it that actually just I wintered over and then used them as I needed them. So again, all do really well in the winter months. Picnic tables. I don't know how many have grown lettuce in containers and just plop them on your picnic table. I use dryer lint as a mulch around my lettuce and my, greens when they're on containers, partly because slugs don't like the lint, the dryer lint, and also it keeps the soil from splashing up into the lettuce, so you have much cleaner lettuce or spinach that you're trying to grow. And then some suggested varieties for containers. Again, beans, cucumbers, tomatoes, squash, bush varieties, sweet potatoes, celery, dwarf corn, lettuce, kale, and peppers all do great in containers. There are also, when I say dwarf corn, is it blue jade? I think it's blue jade is a variety of dwarf blue corn that I grow that's an heirloom variety. All herbs, basically. I grow a lot of basil in containers during the summer months. And then many berries, you saw some of my strawberry containers, but collinder and dwarf apple trees do great in containers. Figs actually like a very tight root ball, and so do well in containers. Like if you have a gallon container, one of those whiskey barrels, for instance, do really well. And citrus, I've had a lot of success growing citrus in containers. And here's some photos of some of the containers I've used over the years. Um, this far left-hand bottom corner one was kind of cool. I actually got this from the Northwest Garden Show, had a photo. And this is where a gentleman or someone, a gardener, used eave gutters as a way of putting on a fence and growing strawberries. There's my tabletop method, and so forth. Citrus, one tip I want to give for citrus is that, and this is a grapefruit on one side and then a Meyer lemon on the other, is that your grapefruit or your citrus will get root bound after a while as well as top heavy. And so what I recommend is every 4 to 5 years, basically have to take the plant out of the pot, trim the upper branches, and also trim the roots off. I mean, not all off, but trim them down and then repot it into new soil. And it's your way of kind of keeping the plant at a fairly small size, compact size, kind of bonsaiing the citrus. And it's a great way of just maintaining its vitality and producing a fruit for many, many years, as opposed to letting it grow in a pot and get too root bound. And then no matter how much liquid fertilizer you put on, it's kind of hard to keep its vitality going. Some tips for container gardening. Like I said, start with really good potting soil, followed by judicious application of liquid fertilizer throughout the growing season. Containers that are deeper than 10 to 12 inches, you can actually, some of these large, like whiskey barrels, the bottom part, you can actually put other things in there that aren't necessarily potting soil that kind of give you less depth, but at the same time, a lot of your vegetables and fruit don't need that much depth and also can save on your potting soil use. Use water retention trays. I love it because you minimize the leaching out of nutrients. Um, don't be afraid to use old potting soil that you used the year before, but just make sure that you balance it with either fertilizer, compost, or maybe mixing with other higher quality potting soil that you haven't used. And then dwarf fruit trees. I showed you pictures of my citrus, but the 5 or 6 years. But then apples, dwarf apples do really well as figs in containers. And because I'm kind of running out of room for fruit trees in my yard because of the larger fruit trees. I am actually growing a lot of my apple trees now in, basically 2 to 5 gallon containers as a way of just kind of getting a sense of the different apple varieties for my own knowledge. Mixing and matching to be effective. Key thing here is to select, know the growth habits of your fruit. Successive plants, spring, fall gardening. You can start with spring peas and garlic and potatoes, and then move into the fall into beets and broccoli and kale. Double planting, you might want to have peas, and then as the peas are starting to get past their prime, plant beans next to them, and then they can climb up the same trellis. Um, Rotating varieties in areas, grow potatoes one year, but then something else, because if you grow potatoes in the same spot several years, you can actually add fungal and other disease insects get into the tubers. And then I always like this golden rule. I think it's an Anne Lovejoy, at least I'll attribute it to her. But a plant failure creates a planting opportunity. And it took me a few years to kind of appreciate that. But it's true. If you lose a certain plant, treasured plant, well, guess what? Now you can actually plant something there, which is kind of cool. And then here just kind of shows some of the sequential planting. I had potatoes in the back, corn in the front. The potatoes mature faster. So by June, you can see the potatoes are still taller than the corn. But then by July and August, the corn is now taken over. But by then, the potatoes are pretty much harvested. And so, and then as the potatoes go, I can then plant fall beets. And then here's the Miss Gillespie beans, pole beans that are being grown on dry shell bean trellis instead of having to yank everything out. And then rotational plantings. One year I had onions and leeks in my vegetable raised bed, and the next year I grew tomatoes, peppers, and sweet potatoes. So I want to end in a quote, and this is by Abraham Cowley. It goes back to 1666 in the garden. And he said, I never had any other desire so strong and so like to covetousness as that one which I have had always, that I might be master at last of a small house and a large garden. And so this always resonates with me. I always wanted a larger garden than a house. And I think I have a good balance right now. So that's the end of my presentation. Any other questions?
It's lovely. Thank you. I'm going to say one and then anybody else can call out. April says, all my containers have sugar ants in them. What are your thoughts about that? Leave them or try to get rid of them? Sometimes those are odorous house ants, but they're the tiny guys, right? Correct me if I'm wrong about that, April. What do you think, Darren?
And those are your house plants or outdoor plants?
April, are those your garden outdoor plants? Small ants in the garden.
Huh. I kind of don't bother with them if they're in the garden. Um, they generally don't cause any harm to any of my vegetables or fruit. In fact, they might be beneficial to some extent. House is another issue.
Mind if I chime in on that?
Sure, please. Yeah.
They are not harming your plants. They don't eat plants for a living generally. Sometimes it'll indicate, like if you have them in a compost pile, and it'll indicate that it could be more moist. They are
Mhm.
enjoying the fact that it's somewhat nice, dry place to live. So sometimes when your containers have like dry spots in the bottom, they'll live in there, but not always. And they have a role. I generally find. John asks, have you had a problem with voles damaging young fruit tree trunks? And how do you prevent that? What do you think, Darren?
I've had most of the damage I've had is basically with beets, where you have a lovely beet and then you pull it up and it's like, two
It
thirds are gone.
it looks like a cartoon, right? Like
Yeah.
leaves, and then you think it's going to be like an apple, and it goes in the sides. It curves in,
Yeah.
chewed completely.
Yeah. Yeah. I haven't had any damage with my fruit trees per se, but I hear you because I know people that have had damage. One of the things that I've done in one of my raised beds at Wacky Nut is that we actually put out mouse traps. And if you find an area that looks like it's a den or where voles might be crawling into your yard, putting mouse traps out, and simple thing is you hope that they basically run into the mouse trap. Not that there's any lure or anything that's going to lead them
Mm.
to the mouse trap, but they bump into it. But that's the only thing that I have seen used and had some effect in controlling the voles at Wacky Nut.
I wonder if anybody else has anything you'd like to say. You can also just call out if you want to. Joan McInnes, may I ask, do you see trails of voles? They, through grass, they'll like wear down a little trail or like clear it out a little bit. Do you see the
Yes,
trails?
yes, and I have quite a few trees on property that I don't live on. So
Hmm.
so mousetrap doesn't really work, is not there other than every month or so.
Yeah,
But yes, particularly in the winter, we see if there's snow or whatever, when the snow melts, you have all these little trails.
yeah.
And the
Mm.
and the
People,
voles will actually chew a tree completely off.
yeah.
Uh,
I
up
have hardware cloth around mine because of
I
that.
I've had that and I've done that, and they sometimes they go
Pain though.
under it, and sometimes
Oh.
I've even had one climb up the hardware cloth to about, which was about 18 inches high, and chew the
Hmm.
bark at the top of that.
What about some bamboo barrier or some plastic wrap around it?
Well, they have to be pretty tight. I mean, that might be possible. The other thing I was hoping, if anybody had any experience on, is there's a paint, a white paint made specifically for this. I've purchased it. I haven't put it on
Okay.
the trees I'm going to plant this year, but I was curious if you had any.
I think
And
we
I've
look
heard of
forward
people
to the
using,
answer.
yeah, I've heard of people using just latex white paint, regular white paint. This
Hmm.
is this is an organic product made for that. I just haven't got
Hmm.
around to it. But I'll know by next year this time if it
Yeah.
works.
Yeah, well, good
Yeah.
luck. Yeah.
They
Yeah,
also
okay.
make, it's easier to handle than the hardware cloth. They make green mesh rigid tubes that are like, they look like mega thick deer netting, but they're even much thicker than that that you put around. They're less likely to poke a hole in the tree. And
Mhm,
then you could pin it down, right, around the tree.
mhm.
And these things are at least 3 feet tall. I wonder if that would help. Paint is good, but if, just for our library of
Yeah,
information.
well, probably I'll end up probably doing both. The paint is they don't like the taste, right? So they leave or don't chew it off. But
Yeah.
but I
Darren, do you
but
know why they say don't paint? Like some of the people say paint for insects, but now there's this don't paint. Not for voles necessarily, John. I'm just curious about what that is in terms of insects or something. It doesn't hurt the tree, does it?
Um,
Like, do
I
they?
I've used latex paints for anthracnose, which is a fungal disease that gets into trunks of apples and causes big cankers and actually can circumvent the trunk of a tree and kill it.
Hmm.
Um, so by painting it, you're basically shielding the trunk from that fungus or virus getting into that trunk and then causing the damage. So I've actually seen painting as basically beneficial, and using latex paint, I've never seen, and I've counted some of my smaller apple trees. I've painted the whole trunk severely, and it has not seemed to affect the tree at all.
Cool.
Um,
Susan wants to know, she says, I thought I saw in the beginning of this presentation a mistake people make is to crowd things too much. But then I
yeah,
also saw it's desirable to crowd. This is for veggies. She says, can you talk about when to crowd and when not to crowd?
it depends on the type of plant you're doing. Like for instance, I made the mistake a few years ago of crowding. When I say crowding, I planted my onions very closely packed in about maybe a 4 by 4 foot area. And the ended up getting some fungal issues as well as some insect damage into the onions that caused most of them to basically be damaged and not palatable.
So don't crowd onions if you want them to bulb up, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Green
definitely.
onions, we crowd them quite
Yes.
close because we don't want them to bulb and we're going to pull them really early.
And then some things like, for instance, beets, the cilantro beets that kind of grow up like carrots, those can be crowded very nicely because if you wanted the big giant Detroit beets, because they expand
The round
outwards,
ones, yeah.
yeah, they tend to be less able to crowd. And if you crowd, you aren't going to get very large size. But with the ones that are more like carrot shaped, they can actually grow out of the ground and you can actually have them quite crowded into a container. So you really have to look at what you're growing and what type of produce you're getting from what you have based on the crowdingness. And some crowding can occur if you have really good soil. If you have average soil, then the crowding ends up competing against one another, the different vegetables, and you may not get much.
So intensive growing, there's this thing called French intensive where you
Hmm.
you
Hmm.
do plant things really densely, but you're putting fertilizer into that the whole season.
Hmm.
You fertilize it really well and super deeply so that they're able to eat from that area. I always say don't crowd if this is your first, second, or third year growing. And then once you're good at something, you can try crowding things a little bit and like feeding it extra if you want to.
Yeah.
What do you think about that? I want you to be successful first, and then you can crowd stuff.
Yeah, and just be observant. Notice what, if you're in a pea patch situation, it's a great learning opportunity because you can see what other people are doing.
Do you find, Darren, that like things will sometimes bolt if they're crowded, but if you want to grow them as baby, like baby leaf vegetables, you're going to harvest them really quickly. So you can plant those really densely. Like if you want to get all like mustard that's really young
Yeah.
or arugula or
Or kale.
lettuce.
Or kale, yeah.
Susan says, what about leafy greens?
Yeah.
So do you
Yeah.
say crowd it if you're going to be cutting it as babies,
Yeah.
but then if you want like big romaine, then don't crowd it?
Right. Yeah.
Did that work for you, Susan? It's a matter of getting kind of experience. Oh, sort of. Okay, Susan, what are you thinking of? Kale or what are you thinking of growing?
Well, I can give you an example. Like, for instance, if you have a tomato in a container, tomato plant, one of the things I see, like in my neighborhood, they'll have like these small 1 gallon pots with this tomato plant in it. And they may get like 2 or 3 tomatoes off of that one plant. But if they get one of those larger ceramic pots that I have, I don't know if they're like 5 gallons or whatever, you get a really nice tomato plant with lots of tomatoes, and you can plant around the base maybe some other things, like
Like
maybe
basil or something? Yeah.
like basil or maybe a cucumber that kind of twines outside the tomato onto the sidewalk or
Susan specifically says she wants it to last as long as possible. So I say don't crowd, but
you know.
if you want it to last a really long time, you want it to feel like it's the king of the world and is immortal. So it's thinking, there's nothing stressful about my environment. I'll live forever. Unless you're like Darren, in which case, Darren, you can probably do that and still make them live forever because you're really great with the fertilizer, right?
Well, I use chicken manure tea. I use green compost, which is from Comfrey. I didn't
Hmm.
mention this stuff, but yeah.
So you're working at it. If you do plant them closer together, you're constantly feeding those,
Yeah.
especially as it's sources of nitrogen, because that kind of keeps them
Yeah.
youthful, right? They think I can grow more leaves that way,
Yeah.
metaphorically speaking. Got it. Um, she says, as long a season as possible, such as Swiss chard, kale, arugula. Yeah, okay. She says, great, thank you. Um, Barbara Muser says, any suggestions on nut trees or shrubs or perennial vegetables? That's a big category. Robin, maybe Bennett's on. He's got a lot of nut trees.
Yeah, Bennett. Go Bennett.
Are you sitting next to Robin? I saw Robin's name on here.
He's not
No.
with me. It's
Oh,
just,
okay. Are
but
you
yes, we do
also?
have a lot of nut trees, but they're huge. I mean, they're not small
Yeah.
space growing by any
Right. And
stretch.
they're also established. Like when you moved in, they were just there, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
But if
the
Barbara
nut tree,
wants to see walnut trees and what they look like after 50 years, she should go up to Johnson Farm, right?
yes, we've got a lot of walnut trees. We've
Hmm.
also planted recently some hazels, some hazelnuts, and
Hmm.
they're small or right now, but they do take a long time to develop,
Mm.
um, where we'll actually see any nuts from them, I
I
think.
didn't know that.
But but they're small and they're pretty compact plants. So, I mean,
Hmm.
if you're small space growing, hazelnuts might be an option, but you need at least two of them to pollinate each other, my
Right.
understanding.
They're not self-fertile, right? And also they
Right.
call them hazel bushes, but they can be, much
Quite
bigger
large.
than a typical bush, right? But they're not a
Yes.
huge tree. Yeah.
Yeah.
How do
They're
you keep
nice.
the squirrels off, though? I've never seen a hazelnut that wasn't eaten by a squirrel.
Yeah, we have our moments. Um,
I have dreams of a maximum security hazelnut compound, but
yeah.
I'll see what happens for you. John McInnes says, "Does anybody use seed tape to prevent crowding? So you don't waste seed because they're all spaced out."
Well, particularly the small seed are so hard to get spaced.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
I'm going to try that this year. I bought some seed. I think it was on carrots. I bought some seeds tape from Territorial. Let's see how that goes.
Do you ever mix spent potting soil, or good potting soil for that matter, or sand or something with your seeds? And then you sprinkle that down, and it causes the seeds to be dispersed appropriately.
Hmm.
I've done that.
Interesting.
Deb wants to.
John, I always use seed tape for my carrots. Um, it's just because I cannot stand those tiny little seeds. And then I feel like when I thin them out, I'm just inviting carrot fly to come join me.
Yeah.
Because of
So,
the smell, right? They can smell it.
right.
Hmm.
So I always find the seed tape for carrots to be the most effective. It's spacing it without having to then thin later.
So Robin, what do you do for the carrot fly breast or rest fly? I mean, do you put like netting over it or?
No, I am not your pest advocate. I sort of assume that the pests are going to get 20 to 30% of everything, and I just
Uh,
go with it.
okay.
Um, I try to companion plant a lot, and that seems to do a pretty good job of it. But, or use seed tape for carrots and try to find these ways around it that aren't sort of pesticide related.
Darren,
Robin is a Zen grower.
I don't know about Zen, maybe just lazy and cheap, but
Okay.
I was successful with the netting over for fruit for carrots for the
Hmm.
carrot fly. Very
Hmm.
successful. And I also used netting for the daikon radish. And in fact, I just took 25 pounds of daikon radish from this winter that I had netted all winter. They were huge. I took them to food bank this morning.
Oh, nice.
Yay for food bank growing.
Yep.
Yeah.
And you were here last time, Darren, right? And you were listening to John McInnes is the one who has the beds that are already 2 feet tall, and then he's going to put a little fence around and see if he can keep the carrot rust fly at bay because carrot rust fly only flies a couple of feet above the ground.
Hmm.
It
Wow.
doesn't go higher than that. They do that a lot in the
Yeah,
UK, right, John?
yeah. Supposedly, a carrot fly can only fly up to about 2 feet, and I have a 2 feet tall raised beds, and I've done it without netting, and I had some damage. Not as much as I would at the ground level, but I did see over in the UK they do a lot of carrot fly fences, so they leave the top open. One of the troubles with the netting over the top, the carrots become very leafy
Yeah.
and not as big on the root side. So I was open to open that. So I'm going to try both this year.
That's interesting.
Now, even if they can't fly very high, I think on a gusty wind they could still pop up and over. But I'm going to
Updraft.
try that. Yeah.
Maybe they pole vault. What about like my I guess my strawberry tabletop method? Would those be high enough to prevent the? Although they probably wouldn't have much depth for carrots.
Yeah, you'd need deep ones, right?
Well, I could get like the Thumbelinas or whatever, the little small
Yeah,
carrots. Yeah.
yeah.
I've
Um,
also had a lot of good luck by planting carrots in between my onions. I do a row of onions,
mm,
a row of onions, a row
Mhm.
of carrots.
there's
And I
moth.
don't know whether it's the smell disrupts the carrot fly, but that seems to cut it down quite a bit if I can sandwich a row of carrots in between onions.
Cool.
Deb Rudnick gives yet another fist shake at the danged squirrels eating the hazelnuts.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
Metaphorically, Deb, I took liberty. But John Fawcett has a maximum security blueberry compound, which was pretty uh, straightforward, I would say, to construct. And I have a dream that that would probably work if it were just a little bit taller. So we're going to go to John's place probably in September. So stay tuned, and you can see his
Well,
little his
I had a
quite
lot of training,
ample.
Carol. I had 4 years of high school shop.
And you chose nice drapey netting too,
Nice drapey
which is
netting.
nice.
Yeah.
Yes, it's woven, I think. Um, there's another one. John, I've usurped your role as comment reader because I thought we were all changing roles tonight.
I like to
Um,
mix things up, keep it fresh,
thank
you know.
you. Thank you. Barbara Muser asks, as part of her previous question, How about perennial vegetables? So, Barbara, it sounds like nut trees, shrubs, and perennial vegetables you might be looking for in order to do less kneeling down over annual plants, if I'm guessing correctly.
Yeah, I was thinking asparagus. I have
Hmm.
I have strawberries. I have let's see what else. I need to get some asparagus put in, but I was wondering if there are any other perennial vegetables that would be good to put in, maybe in a different area of the garden that I don't rotate because I do rotation.
Hmm. Hmm.
Let's go. I do have hazelnuts, and I was wondering if there are any other, if anybody else has done any other kinds of nuts like almonds or any other, something small.
Yeah, they do have small almond trees. I can just tell you that almonds are on the radar of people who are tracking climate change, and the USDA is expecting us to possibly be able to grow almonds up here. They need a ton of heat, so they're a Northern California grows like most of the nation's almonds in these hot valleys, but there are some um, varieties that you could try up here. It kind of depends on the year, but that is courtesy of climate change.
The other thing though you have to worry about is brown rot because that gets into
Hmm.
the almonds quite severely. Because my son has an almond tree in front of his house and it's attacked by brown rot quite extensively with a lot of dieback.
So it's experimental at best, right?
You know, it is.
Hmm. And I don't remember what the variety is that they were kind of promoting.
Yeah.
Anyway, when I did
Like trying
this
to grow
climate
apricots
change
in
for
our
you guys.
climate.
Oh
It's
my
a
gosh.
challenge.
Yeah, they're very closely related, right?
Yep, yep.
Almonds and apricots. Other perennials. Well, I will say if you put asparagus in, it likes to eat. It's a perennial that produces a lot of flesh to it, right? So that's a nitrogen heavy activity. And so sometimes people will put it in and they'll go, well, it's in the ground and it's already established. It must be fine. It doesn't need to eat anything, but it does need that. And it's really bad at competing with weeds. And they're hard to get out because the asparagus makes a mat of its own roots and it's hard to get the weeds out. So we often put border around that or isolate it in some other way so that the weeds won't get in there as much. And then fastidiously pay attention to the weeds and feeding it balanced, but certainly not nitrogen, fairly nitrogen heavy
Yeah.
um, fertilizer, and then compost to keep the bed, you know, active, I would guess I would call it.
What about rhubarb?
Oh, yeah. How about rhubarb? That's another heavy eater as well.
Yeah, I have rhubarb. What about sunchokes?
They come back from roots.
Yep.
They
Yeah.
they are rampant. Sometimes you have to, if you don't want them anymore, you have to make a project of getting them out. Do you eat them already, Barbara?
Yes, I have.
Okay, if you already like them, go nuts.
Yeah.
The fandom is divided, right?
Yeah, my stepmother was furious at me because I planted some sunchokes in her yard and she has like about a half an acre garden and she rototills it every year. So she
Oh,
rototilled all the sunchokes up
Uh-oh,
and I
made
don't know
more.
if she had thousands of sunchokes throughout her half an acre garden.
Oca is another one. OCA. It's actually it is a rapid spreader. Um, it's a little tart root ball, kind of. It looks like a, what does it look like? Kind of like a potato or a red ginger, and it's tart and fresh, but it is a runner.
mm,
Um, you know what oxalis is? Have you ever seen that as a weed?
yep.
It looks like clover, and it's the bane of gardeners' existence in many areas. Oca is an oxalis, and so I grew it for 3 years, and then I carefully eliminated it because I didn't want it to get away. But you might run into that
Okay.
or have an oca pot, I suppose. Um, if we haven't addressed your question because I didn't see it or something, would you holler right now? Make sure we've addressed your question. Okay. Well, I want to tell you, Darren, do you have any other comment?
Yep. Other than the fact that I'll be doing a another
Oh yeah,
grafting
tell us about
workshop at
that.
Wacky Nut Farm on the 15th of this month.
Oh, another workshop. So people who missed the first one.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
describe that briefly. Like, can we show up and walk away with a
Yes.
grafted tree?
Yeah,
Or
I have abundance of rootstock, which is basically small dwarf rootstock that you can then put on a scion wood, which is a grafting onto the tree. And we'll have, gosh, at least 100, 150 different varieties of fruit that you can then create your own specialized tree. And particularly for the apples, which is so nice, is you can put those into basically 3 to 5 gallon containers and grow them on your patio, your deck, whatever, and have your own, mini fruit tree. But we're going to be doing that at Wacky Nut from 3 to 5 on the 15th of this month. And the cost per tree is just $5. And that includes everything, the grafting, the scion wood,
that's
whatever you want.
incredible.
Yeah.
People, how are we not doing this? That's really great. And you'll have really great guidance, right? It's not like you have to try to graft solely by yourself,
No,
and not really know how to do it.
no, our plan is I'll have different grafting tools and folks there, like we did with our show several weeks ago. But yeah, the goal is to try to teach people what we're doing, and then if they want, they can try to graft it themselves, or we'll do it for them.
That is fantastic, I think. And then you're doing another one that's a multi, like soft fruits and stuff event coming up, right?
Um,
Fruit Club?
the Fruit Club, well, I'm doing a presentation this month on the 23rd on how to be very fruitful. I mean, how to grow basically your berries, your strawberries, your cane fruit, your raspberries, currants, all that stuff. And it's going to be a deeper dive into what I tried to just skim over today, just simply because we didn't have time. But
Mm-hmm.
very much a focus on how do you grow berries? How do I do the tabletop method? What are my techniques? It's not just a simple, here's a table, throw some ras or strawberry plants, and then ta-da, success. How do you grow strawberries over several years? Do you use first year, second year, third year plants? How do you rotate them? What type of soil do you use? How do you vary that?
Sounds
So
cool.
talking about that, yeah.
And so to get to that, they should come to the Grange on that night. But
Yes.
also in the chat, I have written the letters BI fruit.club, right? So go there and you can find out about events. There's an events link. I think it's at the bottom of the page when I see it. And you can sign up for news and all kinds of things like that. So what's the date for the tree grafting? What's that date again?
I just put it in there.
Okay. So April 15th, 26th, 3 to 5.
Yeah.
Looks good. Um, and then uh, Lars wants to know about companion planting, including things to discourage pests. And then I'm gonna share what's coming up for next month. So do you want to address that? Or anybody who wants to talk about companion planting?
Yeah, that's one that I didn't do a lot of delve into. I know that marigolds, some different plants are very good for I think like Robin mentioned about onions, putting them with carrots might be a good companion. But I know like for instance, beets and Swiss chard are not very good companions with a lot of other vegetables, um, which is kind of interesting. But my knowledge is very narrow at this point.
And Robin said carrots, onions, carrots, onions, carrots,
Yeah,
onions, right?
yeah. One of the things I found is kind of fascinating is I would grow cabbages and then I would have weeds in between the cabbages. And I
Mm-hmm.
found that when I had the weeds in the cabbages, it tended to harbor a lot of spiders and beneficial insects that then would eat the cabbage worm.
Mm-hmm.
So there's,
Oh my goodness. You know what else eats the cabbage worm? Well, I'm going to show you. Can you see this? Uh, do you guys see how can we get a picture of a lot of bugs,
dragonflies.
various things? Do you see 'em that I'm sharing? I'm sharing my
Yeah.
screen. Is that working?
Yes.
Next Zoom, first Tuesday of next month, we're going to talk about insects. When we talk about beneficial insects, everybody thinks of the pollinators. I say beneficial, and people go, oh, pollinators. But there are tons of beneficial insects that are preying on your pests. So there are plants that you can plant that really help these guys, and it's not the same as for pollinators.
Hmm.
Some of them are the same, but many are not. And they're so cool. I challenge you to identify of the insects on your screen right now, which ones eat your plants and which ones eat your pests. So if you look at those, you might think, well, I know that upper left, that's a housefly, that must be bad. But the answer, of course, is that every single one of these and hundreds more eat your pest insects. And they're really fun. It's actually, you can be, attracting these guys actually is a matter of sometimes being a little less fastidious in your garden. So you're like, oh, that's not weeds, that's a bud bed. Um, or less raking of leaves and things like that can really be lovely and fun. You can get yourself a little bug zoo. Even, well, anyway, I won't go on about it, but there's a lot more. So that's our Zoom for next month. And stay tuned, we may have a field trip, possibly to a food bank farm where we can help out if we want to in various ways. And you don't have to sign up for a regular time if you do go to a food bank farm. There are many ways to assist them if you like, or if you're just curious. We may be having that field trip. I have to check with John Fawcett, who is the silent partner this evening, the nearly silent partner. So that's what's happening next month in Fruit Club and in Veg Club.